Welcome to Philosophy15. I'm Scott Aikin.
And I'm Robert Talisse.
We're the authors of Pragmatism, Pluralism, and the Nature of Philosophy, and Why We Argue and How We Should, out in second edition from Routledge. Today we are going to talk about civility and the Owl of Minerva problem. So we got two kinds of things coming together. Rob, what's the problem?
So Scott and I have written a couple of things. I think we might have even done a couple of these episodes about what we've called the Owl of Minerva problem. And the name Owl of Minerva comes from a remark that is famous from Hegel: the Owl of Minerva flies at dusk. So let me start by just saying what the general problem is, and then let's talk about how civility is, as a concept, is an instantiation of that problem. So the Owl of Minerva problem is, in its most general form, is the following problem. In public life in a democracy, citizens not only may, not only should, but are expected to, and it might even be their civic duty to, talk together, think together, disagree, argue together, deliberate together about the terms of their shared social life, including their political arrangements. And it's expected that, as a consequence of free thought and freedom of information and all of the rights that we have as individuals under liberal democratic conditions, that ordinary citizens doing their best, in fact doing quite well at thinking through the issues of their day that pertain to their shared social and political world, are going to have real disagreements about how things should go in that world. And so not only do they need to think together and talk together and reason together, they also need to manage their disagreements. Because in a liberal, constitutional liberal democratic society, individuals are understood as equal citizens, that is, as political equals, those disagreements are always disagreements among equals rather than disagreements among superiors and subordinates. And so in managing disagreement, one needs not only, to avoid escalation or, minimize the conditions under which disagreements can come to blows and these kinds of things. We also, as citizens, in managing our disagreements, must also maintain a posture that manifests our respect for the equality of our interlocutors. This is, I take it, sort of non-controversial, living in a democracy, this is what you are.
Should be non-controversial.
Yeah, you're right, okay. At least from the point of view of thinking seriously about civic ethics and democracy, this is all non-controversial stuff. I haven't said anything that should inflame any first-order political disagreement, or have I? So, there's the problem. So, we need to, as citizens, talk about, therefore we're going to be disagreeing about the terms of our social and political association. Those disagreements have to be conducted in a particular way if they are to manifest our respect for one another's equality. That means that we're going to have to devise what we might think of as a second-order vocabulary by which we can evaluate and talk about and assess each other's performance in these disagreements. So we might be having a disagreement about immigration, and an interlocutor might say something that's demeaning, or an interlocutor might, in some way that's opportunistic, misinterpret what I've said. I need a vocabulary by which I can say, well, put the disagreement about immigration on pause for a second, and just note what you did there, right? You misinterpreted what I said in a way that is advantageous to you, or you just escalated things in a way that, you don't need to insult me. And once we sort out that sort of assessment of what's going on in the debate from the point of view of our conduct, then, if we successfully do that, we can get back to the first order debate, which is about immigration.
So
Now-
that second order is supposed to kind of play like a kind of a referee's role, or a kind of everybody's supposed to be. We've got some ground rules here, and we'll remind each other of the ground rules sometimes.
That's right.
Okay.
Now here's the problem, and this is what we mean by the Owl of Minerva problem. That second order language, those second order concepts, right? You know, we're not ground rules. We're not supposed to insult each other. We're supposed to give the most charitable interpretation of what the other person has said. We're supposed to actually address what they've said rather than the kind of person they are, or other kinds of irrelevant features of them as our interlocutors. That second order vocabulary gets to play that, as Scott said, refereeing role. Yeah. Only if it's common property. That is, only if those concepts are themselves not sullied by or infected with or intoned with first order commitments.
Right.
Right?
And the crucial thing is that just in exactly the same way that folks who don't play by the rules in games get excluded from the games, right, are no longer players in the game, one worry is that you can write the rules so that they favor your side.
That's right.
And that's one of the worries, because if the rules favor your side, then that makes it so that the other side, when they start playing a certain way, what they're really doing is just playing against you. But if you make it so that them playing against you looks like they're just breaking the rules of the game, they're no longer equal players in the game. That's
right. So, good. So those second order concepts have to maintain a kind of neutrality.
Right.
The worry and the Owl of Minerva problem is that those second order concepts are always going to be subject to a kind of, we might want to say, semantic descent.
Yeah, that's good.
Right?
Yeah.
A semantic descent back into the first order.
Right.
So that, in fact, in our current politics and current political discourse such as it is, you can see that the term or the assessment that a particular speech act or a particular message is racist is now being sort of used or deployed in this way. So there's president says something obviously, tweets something obviously racist. He gets called out for his racism. And then Lindsey Graham comes out and says, one thing I know, if you're a Republican and you're running for president or our president, eventually you're going to get called racist.
Called.
Right. Good,
racist.
good. Right. So there's the idea that this evaluative category, right? That's racist. And the rule that's hanging out in the background there is, you know, you can't say such flagrantly inegalitarian things as a contribution to proper public discourse. So to call a speech act or a message racist is to say it's out of bounds.
Right.
And to criticize the person or hold the person accountable for having violated a principle of democratic conduct. The move then is to say, the charge, the allegation that a particular speech act is racist is itself a political tactic to, wait for it, silence, exclude, marginalize certain certain people with a certain political profile.
Right.
Let me use one other example. This is a couple of weeks ago. When Kellyanne Conway was asked by a reporter what she makes of the allegations, like they're pretty strong allegations, by the way, that she, Kellyanne, has violated the Hatch Act. And Kellyanne said, "You're not going to use that to silence me," which was again another like mention an accusation that I've broken the law as actually a kind of cudgel to use in our partisan squabbles.
So it looks like there are sort of two levels to this then.
Right.
There's the first level, which is, you might call it the working the refs level, where what you do is you try to manage the semantic content of the rules or the ground rules so that they favor your side. So now, whether or not that's so recognizing that political circumstances make it so that the semantic contents of the rules are going to be shifting with the normative ground with us is just a reality. It's the strategic shifting of the ground is the first concern. The second one is the considerably more insidious, which is the accusation that the other side has done so, and thereby any of their criticism is then going to be merely a strategy of silencing instead of criticism.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So there's the first order, which is, again, just on the one hand, just a feature of the shifting of the semantic sands of what justice or racism or what these sorts of instances, what these normative terms mean, and then the fact that someone's going to be strategic about them. That's one feature of it. The second feature is then using that accusation as a way of just saying something like, look, given that, your criticism in particular is not going to have any of that because it's just this. Right.
Right. So that second sort of version looks like it's the semantic descent.
Semantic descent.
Right,
yeah.
Right. We take the vocabulary that was supposed to help us talk about the way that we're talking.
Right.
And evaluate the way that we're talking. And then just say, that vocabulary really just is a way to conduct verbal combat. It's not it doesn't stand above the fray to help us navigate and manage our disagreements. It's a way of disagreeing.
Right.
Right.
And this happens, right, and so that phenomenon is one that happens in particular in politics, but it happens in plenty of other places where we've got these vocabularies where on the one hand you can imagine someone trying to craft the name of the concept of a fallacy to just target one's political opponents, right? Where it's like we say something like voodoo economics or something like that. Like that's a term not about a particular thing, but a kind of a program of economics that was supposed to be kind of magical thinking that in giving wealth to certain folks will make other folks richer or something like that. There was something voodoo about that. But now it gets used as a smear term. But now someone just says something like, yeah, but now you're just using that smear term against me. Right? So on the one hand, it had a political edge to it that looked like it was, again, working the refs. But now it gets used as, now you're just using that against me. Right?
That's right.
Now you're just using the smear term against me.
So here's why we characterize this as the Owl of Minerva problem then, right?
Yes.
It's because this evaluative vocabulary can emerge, right? The second order evaluative vocabulary can emerge only out of our attempts to run discourse well.
Yeah.
But once we've got that evaluative vocabulary in place,
we're still partisans.
Yeah, it then becomes fodder for first-order disputes. And so it looks as if that second-order evaluative vocabulary shows up a little bit late and then is always a step behind the actual conduct of the discourse.
And one reason why it's always a step behind the conduct of the discourse is that we're not just working the refs, we're also the refs.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, we're working the refs, but like there's no third party that we go to in these disputes. It's like we're the refs. And so when we work the refs, we work ourselves, and as a consequence, of course, the discourse, our evaluative discourse is always going to lag behind it, because as we work ourselves, we are not going to have the concept for how we got worked. And the ways that we accuse each other of having been worked.
That's right. So the evaluative stuff that's supposed to regulate and help us to conduct ourselves well in discourse is kind of always yesterday's news.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
We think that's the deep problem of any discussion, argumentation, deliberation, discourse-based conception of democracy among
equals.
real disagreement among equals.
Right.
So that's the Owl of Minerva problem. Let's do another one just on how the concept of civility. Functions in this way.
Okay.
It's Philosophy 15, folks. We'll see you in the next episode.